Men, do you ever feel like you just can't get ahead? Like you're misunderstood? Like you have no one to talk to that truly hears you?
And women, are you often frustrated, hurt, and saddened in your relationships with the men in your life?
What if there were a community of like-minded men going through the same challenges that would support, hear, and understand what you're going through?
Working together in unison to create understanding, intimacy, and strong connections. That's the Way of the Illuminated Warrior.
Way of the Illuminated Warrior Talk Show is a forum of candid conversations for men and women about men. Heard every Thursday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. Being a man today is not always easy. Until now.
Welcome to the Illuminated Warrior Talk Show, where men and women come together to talk about men's challenges.
Yes, welcome everyone to the show. I am Waska, also known as Perry, and I'm the founder and wisdom keeper of the Way of the Illuminated Warrior Transformational Men's Community. And I am anticipating a great conversation tonight addressing the topic of clear communication, which I believe is at the core of peaceful, productive, and healthy relationships. So without further ado, I will turn it over to my illustrious co-host so we can get the ball rolling and the words are flowing. Take it away.
Awesome. I was thinking that we could start off on the area of power struggles, since that tends to be where the communication issues kind of go askew.
Power struggle. Well, wait a minute. I want to talk about something else. Come on now.
There we go. See? Who can dominate the conversation, right? According to Dr. Robert Masters, in relationships where there doesn't appear to be any power struggle, it's often because one partner is, with no overt fuss, allowing the other one to run the show. Pardon the pun. Most couples don't fully resolve their power struggles, settling instead for a partial resolution or negotiated truce, taking comfort in the common territory between them that is no longer under dispute. So how do we solve and resolve power struggles with a partner? And how do we engage in conscious, connected communication where both individuals are heard, especially when men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and we often speak two entirely different languages?
Very, very true. Yes. I think the first thing that we could acknowledge is that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So that must say something that maybe it's twice as important to listen as it is to speak.
That's a great point. That is such a good point. Yes. Yeah. That in itself should be a sign and a symbol to us, right?
I believe so.
With the capacity, unless a person is talking out of both sides of their mouth, and then they could technically say that they have to.
If you could do that, that's pretty impressive. Yeah. So I definitely want to get into the differences of how men communicate and how women communicate, and maybe first we could start off just some basic, clear, and effective ways of communicating. So let's ponder and throw around a few things. So one thing I would say is it's very important to stay on message. So if the conversation is about whatever the topic or specific thing is, bouncing all over the place and not being clear, not being heard, not being understood is part of not staying on the message. So I think that's one thing that's very important to do, and making it a two-way conversation, because otherwise it's really not a conversation if one person is always speaking and the other person is not understanding, not acknowledging, not able to respond. So what do you think about those two first points?
I think that's a great place to start, particularly in regard to staying on point, because so often in getting into conversation, one person is tending to try to figure out what they're going to say, or how they're going to win, or how they're going to dominate the conversation and get their point across. Or I've seen cases where an individual constantly deflects to another type of topic entirely, and that sends things askew, and it just creates more conflict because nothing ever gets resolved. And so perhaps part of the beginning piece of any conversation is to set an intention and an understanding of what they're going to resolve or what they're going to focus on, so that both parties know when you have been in conversations yourself with other men or with women and there has been an agitation? How do you stay on point, Waska?
Well, thank you for asking that question. And when you were saying deflecting, the first thing that comes to mind is, is in martial arts. In martial arts, you could deflect, you could block, you could take the strike, you could hit back. But what it makes me think of is, like, if you're even having that thought of deflecting, then it's not an equanimous conversation. It's not going to be a good, clear, and effective communication, because which we will get into the difference between responding versus reacting. But if you're deflecting and you're reacting, then how could there possibly be clear communication when more than likely you're already thinking about what it is that you're going to say to deflect or to dissuade or to change the other person's point of view? And I think we need to start off with the equal footing and understanding that we're here to. There is no losers. We're both winners, because we want the same thing. We want to communicate. We want to clearly have our words heard and acknowledged. And that doesn't mean they have to be agreed upon, but to be heard and acknowledged, and then have the other person respond back. And if it's not clear, you could ask the person, what did you hear me say? Or they could respond back, this is what I heard you say, and make sure before you go further and further and further down that rabbit hole that seems to happen with unclear communications, is that you understand what the person is saying.
I feel like a lot of times, a lot of people, they listen to respond and they don't listen to understand.
What a powerful point, Dolly B. That is true. People do sometimes take that place to where, like she said, they're trying to come up with their response and not really understanding. I know that I have found a very positive way to handle disagreement in my own life is to simply let the person speak and be there as the conduit to listen, and then wait until another time to go back and approach the person and say, are you ready? Are you in a space where you can now hear me? And to let each side have their space to just talk and just be heard, to have that place of sacred witness in that way. It has more often resulted in resolution in that way than trying to discuss. Because if someone is really heated in the moment, they're not going to hear you anyway. Doesn't matter what you say. They're in a place of shadow. They're in a place of constriction. They're hurt. A lot of things are going on. And so they're not really in a space to listen. They're in pain and they're wanting to be heard. And I think that that's another type of listening. It's kind of like energetically feeling the energy, really looking at the environment, what has taken place, and is there more of a need to speak because you want to get your point across and your ego needs to be right, or is there a willingness to honor the other individual as to where they are in that moment and respect their need to express or feel or emote whatever is coming up?
Yeah, very good points. And thank you, Dolly B, for that message. Yes, I think most people are thinking as the other person is speaking what their response or the reaction is going to be. And I think we really need to have that space, like you're saying also, Simran, the space to listen, because how else could we have it be a two-way communication? And that's what communication is. If it's not a two-way conversation, then it's a soliloquy. It's one person talking and the other person, probably getting frustrated, because that's not a healthy way to communicate. So can you hear me? Can you hear what I am saying? Can you sit long enough to listen to what I'm saying? And if it is, pushing a button, just like you brought up, Simran, it's very important to maybe even start off before what you anticipate being a heated conversation, and set a ground rule of, hey, listen, if this gets a little out of control, gets too heated, let's have a safe word, or let's make sure either one of us can say, let's take a time out. And this came up last week also. Once one person gets really heated, chasing after the other person and not letting it go, that we could say, hey, let's take a step back and we will revisit this, and even set a time, because that's important also. John Gray talks about that as well in his book. Not just leaving and running away, but saying, hey, listen, I need some time to process this. I need some time to think about it. I want to, have a calm space, and in whatever, an hour, 2 hours, tomorrow morning, whatever it is, setting a time so we both know that the conversation will continue.
I think Urban Monk is back this week and has a comment. Yeah, welcome back, Urban Monk.
Brother.
Hey guys, thank you both so much for putting on this wonderful conversation. Just popped in. I think Simran and I had come on one of your shows before. I wanted to get both of y'all's input on the power of empathy, and this is a show that me and another person had done earlier this week, and we talked about the distinction between feeling for a person and feeling with a person, and feeling with being something that we should all try to kind of turn to when employing empathy with another person. So sharing their vulnerabilities, sharing the feelings with them. And similarly, like one of the other listeners said, rather than hearing people, why don't we start listening to them? And so these two very subtle, nuanced, distinctive behaviors where you shift from hearing to listening and feeling for and feeling with, I feel have dynamic changes in relationships. What do y'all think?
It's a powerful question, feeling for or feeling with. Do you want to start off, Waska, or you want me to dive into that one? Which one?
Well, if you're feeling the need to dive, I've got your back. I'll pull you up if you go too deep. Go for it, and then I will respond.
I think that I think first there has to be the distinction between empathy and sympathy, because so often as children, we are modeled or taught to be sympathetic to those around us. And sympathy is actually a shadow. It is feeling pity. It is feeling sorry. It is holding a person as incapable, or seeing them in a space as if they cannot transform the experience that they're in or transform themselves. And so that's a dangerous zone to step into, because we then not only disempower them, we start to slip into that landscape of codependence, which then pulls us down into our own shadows. Empathy, I think, is really where we are intended to go. It is necessary for us to understand and recognize feelings and energies and sensitivities that are in the world around us, because it is a way for us to also stay in our humanity. But I feel that when we step into empathy, to honor and allow that person to be where they are, to hold the space for them as capable, but then understand that in that feeling of empathy, they are inviting us to feel our own place of the same kind of pain. And when we do our work, we not only do the work for ourselves, we do the work for the other and our world, because we are starting to shift energies. We're all one, and there is such a mixed bag now and a collective soup that we have created, particularly when it comes to the energies and the emotional fields, that I think it's really, really important to move into independence and interdependence as opposed to the codependence. And instead of even the empathy, which is something that we have to hold and feel, it is about moving more into emotional intelligence and emotional intimacy, where we can be with the other person, we can hold the space, we can allow them to be there and help them to rise into who we know they are by simply listening. Again, it goes back to this conversation about knowing how to listen rather than talk. That would be my take on it.
That's great points. Yes, and it's a great question from Urban Monk. Appreciate you coming back and supporting the show, brother. So empathy, very interesting, and I love the distinction you're making between sympathy and empathy, Simran. It's very, very valid and good point. Empathy, although it is innate, it's a learned capability. So when we have feelings wanting another person to be happy, healthy, whole, and healed, I think the empathy is stronger. And again, like you were saying, the difference between sympathy and empathy really is, it's supporting the feelings. It's supporting the feelings of another. And we could do that in a lot of ways. And I think that's one of the reasons that, I chose this topic for clear communication, ungarbled communication, because I think, and I feel you really can't be empathetic to someone if you're not in that space of feeling, being open to feeling, yes, and thinking how someone else is feeling when you're speaking, when you're reacting, when you're responding, when you are in any situation. So I think it's really important, to be with, but also to share in a clear communication what your feelings are, and expressing to another person that you're there to support them in whatever their feelings are. So hopefully that answers your question, Urban Monk. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, when we look at communication between men and women, it's really necessary to know if you're going in from the neck up or the neck down, because the reactivity is typically going to be from the neck up. It is going to be the ego, the mind's going to be
Yes.
involved, it is going to be the identity. But if we're going in from the neck down, then the empathy can kick in to where there is a feeling and an understanding of where you are, but also perhaps where the other person is. And that's a tough thing in today's world, because we do live in a very heady society. We also live in a very distracted society. And it's a time where we have to move out of that intellectual body and really become more embodied with the feeling and the sensations that are going on in the physical. And I know that there are many men that I have met, and there's a sense of shutting down when they have to face a conflict. Oftentimes there can be a shutdown, or there can be an indifference, or there's been a lot of scientific study of women when they're trying to talk to men, that if they go beyond 4 minutes, they lose them, that men are no longer listening. And so
What? What'd you
from the
say?
man's from the man's perspective, of hearing what I just said, what is it that you're experiencing when in conversation with women? And, how is it that you experience women when you're in a conflict or conversation?
Well, I was going to ask you something very similar, but I'm glad that you asked me that. So tying it together with empathy, I believe someone who's truly empathetic really cares about having a clear communication. Okay, so I'll just round it off with that. So my experience, even with myself, shutting down, whether it's 4 minutes or not, I can't speak to that. I wouldn't say from my own experience that I become indifferent. I shut down, or I have shut down in the past, when I feel like I have not been heard, when I feel like the other person is not hearing me, when I feel like there's maybe an agenda there. And so the communication, between female partners that I've had in the past, I do my best, and I can't, and I won't say that I've always done my best, because I have been triggered. But when I stop and look back and step back and see how I communicated, when it's not effective communication, I have not set my intention to make it a two-way conversation. I have not listened more than I was speaking. I have not made sure that I understood, being empathetic, how she felt. Okay. So I probably did not hear her clearly. I was listening, but I probably did not hear clearly what she was saying. And I think another aspect of this is respecting the person as well as respecting yourself, but respecting the other person's point of view, whether you agree with it or not. And I think going into any conversation, especially if it's going to be one where somebody's going to shut down or become indifferent or move away, if those aspects are there, then I think there's a very, very good possibility we're going to have a happy medium, whether we agree with each other or not, and communication will be clear, and there will be empathy there as well.
Yeah, and when there is that conversation that's taking place and it gets constrictive, or even if it's an inflated type of issue, I think that sometimes one of the problems that occur is that there is going to be a resolution, and not every conversation necessarily has a resolution, and not every conversation is going to be seen from the same perspective, because we're all individual and we look at and feel things in such unique and different ways, and most often from the filters of the past, from the filters of
Mm,
childhood. And so even when we're fighting about something or discussing something, particularly between a man and a woman, it's usually not the issue. It is usually the thing that was triggered from childhood that this specific issue reminds the individuals of.
good point. Good point. Yes, and I think if we remember that, that we're being triggered, just like in the Don Miguel Ruiz book, The Four Agreements, don't take it personally and don't make assumptions. And I believe when we follow that example, that we won't get triggered as much. And you were saying about not necessarily having the resolution. Like, to me, isn't it just a resolution if we just heard each other, if we just understood each other? We don't necessarily have to agree with each other, but at least it's a good foundation that we heard each other, we understand what the other person is saying. That to me is a two-way
Mm.
good communication, because there's a lot of different skills, and what you were saying before about the 4 minutes, I've heard that a lot, and to a degree, I will acknowledge, whether it's a man or a woman, when I feel like somebody's just droning on and on and on and on, I do start to feel like, okay, this person has just got an agenda to just speak and not, and sometimes I will be okay with that, because if a person's hurting and they really just need to get it out, I'm okay with that and I'll be present. But when it's feels like an agenda just to like strike out there, get the words out there, make the point, be right, then I do feel like I'm drifting away, which leads me to the point of, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? How important is it to
Mm.
be right? I mean, what's your experience with that in having a disagreement or poor communication where the other person, you just know, it's like no matter what you say, they just want to be right.
Yeah, I have had experiences with individuals where they really needed to be right. And uh, I am more of a non-confrontational person. And so it's easier for me to kind of step back than to try to fight to be right. I think when I was younger, there was a little bit more of that fight to be right than there exists at this moment in time. And when a person believes they're right, whether they are or not, it really is pointless to try to argue or convince or get to a place where you're think you're going to get them to change. So
Mm,
that to me is a perfect definition of insanity. It's like trying to change something
mm,
that's
oh
immovable.
yeah.
So what's the point? And in those moments, it really is best to just listen. And it's about, what do you need to do to get yourself to a place of peace? Because again, what needs to be right? It's usually the head. It's usually the ego.
Mm,
Happiness is found in the heart. And so it's once again, it's are you living from the neck up or are you living from the neck down?
mm, yeah, that's a good point, and I believe when you're coming from the place of you have to be heard, you have to be right, the person's not considering these things. And I want to address a little bit about nonverbal communications, which I think is really important also. And this could be whether somebody is, like we're speaking about, somebody who's in that headspace where, hey, I'm going to dominate this conversation, I'm going to be right no matter what, or it could be the complete opposite. It could be a very friendly, lovely, loving conversation, just the body language. What do you think about that in your experience?
That's a really important piece, especially having written the book Conversations with the Universe. There's so much communication that comes that is nonverbal, and you can look at a person's tilt of their head, of their arms, of how they're leaning, There are different aspects that really tell, where they are in something. If you're talking to someone and they are constantly moving their right hand forward, they're really speaking to their father as they're speaking to you, because the right side of the body is the masculine, the left side of the body is the feminine. And so once we start to understand, the representations of the body, and, whether people are leaning in or leaning back, these different things and what they mean. If they're leaning in and closer, it's because there is always this look at the future. They were conditioned to always think forward rather than to be present. People that lean back, it's because they are always resting in the past. They're looking through the lens of the past. And all of these little subtle clues of individual gestures or stances or tapping of a foot, or looking, a certain direction with the eyes, can kind of tell you where the person really is. And in that moment, I would say, maybe stop and ask the person, what are you feeling? Because when people are in a rant or they're talking about something, again, they're back in the head. And if you can bring them into the body and say what they're feeling, all of a sudden the emotion will come out as opposed to the words. And that creates a whole different level of experience in listening between two people.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. The crossed arms. I mean, there's like the art of negotiation, even, somebody who has crossed arms, they're closed in their stance. Same thing with posture. Are they having direct eye contact, or as you said, sometimes like if they're looking up to the right as opposed to looking down to the left, they mean different things according to psychology and all. Fidgetiness, as you mentioned, also, and just even if the person is just really engaged and they're smiling, you could tell when somebody is actively listening, as adverse to waiting to say what they have to say or interjecting or interrupting, and all. So it's definitely important. And another technique that I learned a long time ago is, especially if it's an important point. I've had a few people in my life who love deflecting, love changing the subject, love moving the conversation and steering it the way they like to. So if it's something important to me, that I haven't gotten a response, or I haven't gotten the acknowledgement that at least you heard me before you're changing the subject or ignoring what I'm saying, I always go back to that. One person I'm thinking about in particular, they'll always ask me a question to try to again, divert and change the conversation. So I said, I'll gladly answer that. I said, but can you please, answer my question or address what we were just speaking about? Because so many times the conversation goes in a whole different direction, and what was important to me to be at least heard and acknowledged doesn't get heard and acknowledged. And that's the kind of thing that fuels resentments and anger and wanting to just interrupt the other person. And I think that's where active listening comes in, and feeding back what you heard if you're not clear, asking for the person to repeat what they said if you're not clear, and doing the same for them, and stopping every once in a while, taking a breather. Again, that's where the active listening comes in, and making sure that the other person understands what you're saying. That's effective communication.
I definitely don't have to be right, but it's imperative that the people in the room that I'm speaking with agree with me and think that I'm correct. But the need to be right thing is so narcissistic. But when I'm talking, you need to listen, and if you disagree, you're wrong. But I don't need to be right.
Yeah, good point there, Bonsoir. Yes, it's not about being right. It's about having your feelings acknowledged. I think that's really the basis for so many people that that react and are not happy in a conversations because their feelings weren't acknowledged. That's really what it comes down to. So yes, good point. It's not necessarily about being right. It's about being heard, having your feelings acknowledged. Again, like Monk was saying, having that empathy for the other person.
Gary Zukav says that power exists only in the present moment, and that we have to savor each moment, not by grasping it, but by expanding it. And I think that when people are busy talking or trying to get the point across, what they're doing is they're grasping at the moment. But when they can, breathe deeply and truly take in the person in front of them, in their wholeness. That means the energy, the aura around them, the words, their body, the field that is being created between them. Then all of a sudden they're expanding the energy. They're becoming a part of it. They're becoming one with it. And then conscious communications end up taking place. And that creates more loving interaction and listenership, as you were saying before, Waska. So I think that that's a really powerful sharing from Gary Zukav.
Yes, absolutely. And we've spoken about this many, many times before, just what you were reading about, Gary. The power is in the present. It's all about being present, because if you're really being present in that moment, then you're not thinking about what you're going to say. You're not thinking about your response. You're not thinking about how you're going to react. You're not thinking about fixing anything or changing anybody's mind or getting your point across, because if you're thinking about any of those things, then you're not listening. And if you're not listening, how do you have that empathy? How do you expect anybody else to do the same for you if you're not doing it for them? And then it gets back to the ego of, well, I need to be heard, I need to be right, and it just does not work. That's another point of good communication, which concerns avoiding the concerns of others. When you avoid the concerns of others, that's where that narcissistic ego comes in. So let me ask you your feelings, Simran, about giving solutions or unwanted advice in a conversation that's unsolicited. Because that's a big point.
That is actually violent communication. I love the book Nonviolent Communication, by the way, but what you've just asked about is violent communication, because when we give advice or force something or don't preempt with requesting permission to say something in regard to a person or about them or about a situation, it's actually a dominant type of energy. That is part of the shadow masculine energy that can be exhibited from a male or a female. And so I have always been the type that if there is something that I want to say, I'll say, are you open to feedback? Or would you be willing to hear my experience on this? And allowing the person to be open, because if you don't, the person's going to be closed anyway, and they're not going to hear what is being said. And that's one of the things I love about also the nonviolent communication, is that it really comes from a place of understanding what's underneath rather than the surface that is taking place. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you make. I never really thought of it as being violent. I thought of it being maybe more as a little self-serving or passive-aggressive, but I definitely see how it could be, a violent way of communicating as well. And that's why one of the tenets of our Illuminated Warrior Circles is that we're not here to fix anybody. We're not here to give anybody advice. We're not here to tell anybody what they should be doing or that they shouldn't be doing. It's about active listening and supporting our brothers in that listening. And this is one thing that I have noticed the differences between men and women. Women do commiserate a lot more, and there's a lot of power in that. It's not, well, I agree with you, you're right, he's wrong, but it's supporting one another. And what I tell guys so many times, which is just, it's the way we were brought up from time immemorial. Guys want to fix things. Guys want to, I will say to a degree, not exclusively, but to dominate and control by fixing. And that's the one thing women are not asking men to fix anything. This is true the great majority of the time. You're not asking us to fix anything. You're asking us to be present and to listen. And you tell me if that's accurate, or at least some of the time accurate, if not all of the time accurate.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Waska. Most definitely women are wanting to be heard. And I think that part of the frustration for men, and the reason that they're also wanting to hurt, is because they don't feel so, which is why it's so powerful what you do in your men's circles. Women do that all the time. We get together in women's circles. We speak. We are heard. We don't offer feedback. We allow our emotions and our expressions to be shared. And it is a way of release and witnessing and truly discovering the wisdom within ourselves without having to be told that. And I believe if more men engaged in those types of spiritual experiences, not only would the rush of blocked emotion and feeling and thoughts that may be there come out, but also the depth of wisdom and the power that is within them that is far greater than even their muscle power or that need to fix and do, as you were saying. There's a study that says that that 70 to 80% of women delve into personal growth and spiritual growth, as opposed to about 20 to 23% of men. And if we had more men that actively engaged in their spiritual growth and self-reflection and the listening type communities like you provide, there would be more of that feeling that they were being heard, so that it didn't create the conflict in the relationships that they have.
Yes, thank you for saying that, and it really is very true. It's really a matter of really relearning or remembering, because most guys are not bred and raised and shown examples of how to do that. You know, we honestly do believe that this is what we're supposed to do, and that we are being in service when we are, you know, fixing or giving advice or telling, you know, our partner, hey, this is what you need to do, because that's what we've been told, that's what we've been shown, that's what our dads did. You know, and when I say that, it's a general statement, but for the most part it's true, because that's what their dads did, that's what they were shown, and that's what they were told. So that's why I think the clear communication, especially in partnerships, and you know, again, we're talking about heterosexual relationships. This is true of any gender, any preference, any relationship. It's having the clear communication, which comes with the trust. You know, we haven't really spoken about that. I think that the trust, building trust, is really, really important, and all these things we're talking about are part of it. It's the being present, it's the active listening, it's the honesty, it's the empathy, and that's, you know, that's all links to being, you know, having integrity. So, in your estimation, in your relationships, how do you feel trust plays into it? And you know, and if you want to share any stories about trust or non-trust, how that has affected your relationships.
Absolutely. I think a big piece for women is feeling safe, and trust plays a role in that safety aspect. But I also understand that safety has to be first found within, as well as trust. We have to build that within ourselves. And one of the big ways that I learned a long time ago to do that was to use I statements as opposed to the you and the we statements. Because when
Yes.
we're talking, if we're constantly saying we or we're saying you, then all of a sudden that is no different than dominating a conversation. That is no different than being violent, because all of a sudden you're speaking for another person when you don't know their experience. You don't really know where their stance is, yet you're talking about it that way. And so it's more like, I feel this way, I have had this experience, or I think something is a better way to communicate, to not only build that trust of the autonomy between the two people, but also to create that level of safety where it doesn't feel like you are speaking for the other person or the other person is speaking for you.
That's such an important point. I'm glad you brought that up. That is also one of the tenets of our circles. We share and express from the I. That's a great point. Speaking from firsthand experiences, because exactly, just like you're saying, it does come from a place of ego and wanting to fix once again. And if someone that you're speaking to is not asking you to do that, then why are you doing it? You know, it doesn't serve anyone. So that's a great point. And I believe because we're not, and I'll say men, but I think men and women, we're not really taught necessarily to speak from the I. It really does take practice. So many times in circles, especially with new guys, it's like just exactly what you're saying, and hearing it like that, it is and can be offensive or dominating or about other rather than about self, which is very important, because nobody could dispute how you feel. You can't tell me I don't feel hurt or I don't feel angry or I don't feel, you know, but you can say when I'm saying, well, we or you know, you hurt me, or, well, no, you didn't hurt me. I felt hurt, but, you know, so there's a distinction there. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's very important to speak from the I. Yes.
Exactly, because when you say the you, it is a form of blame. It actually shifts a blame to the person outside of oneself. And when we can take ownership instead of projecting blame, then all of a sudden they feel heard and we get a window into ourselves. I get to be able to see inside of me something that perhaps I didn't realize. And ultimately, we're here for self-realization. So for me to be able to say I experienced the feeling of being hurt is different than you hurt me, because I
Yes.
take ownership for letting anything that was said or done hurt me. It's not that you did, I allowed that to happen. So it's a complete shift from victim consciousness to self responsibility.
Yes. Wonderful point there. And if we go into a conversation with the belief that I am responsible for clear and effective communication. So if there is not clear and effective communication and the other person does not understand what I'm saying, the other person can't acknowledge what I'm saying because they're confused or I'm miscommunicating, whatever it is, with the understanding in myself that it's my responsibility and a failure in communication is my responsibility, that puts another dynamic in there to make sure that I am communicating effectively, which is very important. So it gets back to the clarity of language. It gets back to the listening skills, and all these things take time to develop and practice. So
Yeah, you're totally correct. It's like me saying to someone, I don't understand what you are talking about, and saying you don't make sense. If you say the you don't make sense, like it feels like you're literally attacking them.
yeah, good point, Rebbe. And there's a saying that when you point your finger at someone, because a lot of times when there's anger, you're saying, well, and you're pointing your finger. Well, when you're pointing your finger at someone, you have three fingers pointing back at you. So if you think about that, take a look at your own. My father used to say, take a look at your own hoika. And a hoika in Yiddish is the hump on your back. So instead of pointing out the hump on somebody else's back, take a look at your own hump. Meaning, walk in somebody else's shoes, have that empathy, and be present for somebody, and don't make assumptions that it's all about you. And really, that's a great way to really develop relationships, and we empower ourselves by doing that. We don't have to be right. We have to be compassionate. We have to be there, or I should say, we get to be there for other people, and that's all about being in service and being in the moment, and that's a higher vibration of living. So I invite everybody to try it. Yeah.
There's another aspect of communication that often goes unspoken, and it has to do with tone. I find that I'm really impacted by tone of voice. A person can say something to me, and in the South, it's really easy for people to smile at you and kind of spit at you at the same time by the way they talk to you. And so but the tone always tells the truth, and it's necessary to hear, and feel what is being experienced when there are different tonalities in the room, to get used to your ability to intuit, where the other person really is, and if what they're saying is really supportive or non-supportive. And that helps us to create strong boundaries. It is also important for understanding the empathy piece again, because you connect to how you're feeling and possibly how the other person's feeling. Because I, as an empath, oftentimes if a person is smiling in front of me, if I'm feeling anger all of a sudden, even though they've not said anything, it helps me to understand there must really be some anger underneath there that they're not expressing. Talk a little bit about how you view tone, especially since I think in men generationally and through ancestry, it's almost as if there's a conditioned or a collective anger or ability to go into to different, more dense rage emotions and things like that, that men don't often realize, and that dominance can come out oftentimes in that tone of voice.
Yeah, good question. Good question. In my experience and in working with a lot of the guys, tone is very important, and it's also very telling. And to speak to where it will go to rage or anger, again, in my own experience and what I've heard a lot of the guys say, what equals the anger and even leading to violence is frustration. When we feel like we're not being heard or acknowledged, and that comes into like, we want to fix everything. We want to offer solutions, and if a woman accepts that, in the sense that she doesn't have to say yes, do this, or yes, I want you to fix this, but acknowledges that, hey, I really appreciate that, your response there, and however the best way to do it is, that it's not that I'm really grateful that you came up with that thought for me. It's not really necessary in this moment, but I could really see how thoughtful you are, and it's acknowledging men, because that really is what it comes down to. Again, Marianne Williamson has said that a woman's greatest psychic need is to be cherished, while a man's greatest psychic need is to be acknowledged, and it's really important. And I think that's where a lot of the divide and miscommunication comes in, that we don't have to be right. We don't have to be told we're right. We just need to feel like we're being useful, and that's where the fixing it comes in, because we want to serve. We really do. And when we're told like, no, I don't need that, I don't want that. And I think that's where a lot of the rub comes in between men and women. It's, she's not really saying what she necessarily feels, and neither is he, and we both get hurt, and then it escalates, and then one walks away, and it really stems from not having clear communication or that empathy of understanding how the other person feels.
So it seems like a bit of a double-edged sword, Waska, because you're saying that men are not there to fix everything, but yet they need to be acknowledged for doing. And so what is the fine line to where it stays in a healthy space?
Well, I won't say that we're not there to fix everything, because of course we are, and we can, and we will, and that's what we do. What I'm saying more of is that, to have that empathy and that cohesiveness of understanding in the relationship. If a woman can acknowledge and understand that we're there to serve, it's not really coming from that place of ego or dominance or wanting to be right. At least I believe that it's true for the majority of the time. We want to serve. So that's why we offer solutions. And again, this is the way most of us were raised, that if the woman can see that and understand it for what it is, and again, I'm not saying that's what it is 100% of the time, but you will know, especially from practice, if that's what it is, to acknowledge the guy and say, hey, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in coming up with a solution. It's really not a problem, and I appreciate it. I will take that under advisement, or whatever it is. Having the same conversation maybe that you'd have with one of your girlfriends, in the commiseration process, just letting them know that you heard them, you understand that they have something of value to offer, and just so they feel like their feelings have been acknowledged. If that's clear. Is that clear? Am I communicating clearly?
You are communicating clearly.
All right.
All right. Let's test it. What do you think my tone sounds like right now?
Well, I would think that's a pretty calm tone.
Mellow dude, yeah.
He sounds pretty mellow in that tone.
To testosterone. Can't help it. We need to fix everything.
Men need to fix everything. I think the issue when it comes, and I'll speak for myself, and perhaps this is the way other women feel as well. It's not that we don't appreciate what men do. I appreciate greatly what men do. but oftentimes I don't feel like I'm informed. And for me to feel safe, I need to feel like I'm being included in the conversation or included in the experience or included in the decision. And if that's not taking place and then the man is just doing something for me or doing something because he thinks it needs to be done, there's almost, it creates a separation. And I think that's where I, as a woman, become frustrated. And I've heard of many other women that have spoken and said, you know, the lack of communication is really a lack of communication, that it just was not told or talked about. And so to be inside of a man's head with the things that he has to do, the responsibilities, the feelings of what he has to take care of, family wise, business wise, job wise, society wise, take us inside the mind and let me know kind of, you know, what is that thought process uh, of how men operate when it's trying to take care of a problem, or if it is in a desire to do something for someone that they care about. You know, what are the different approaches that you as a man or that you have seen in other men that you have counseled and coached that either works or needs to shift? How do you see it, Waska?
I wish that, the women could see inside the workings of a man's mind and vice versa. I think it would be a lot clearer. I really do believe that it's two different languages, and I think there's so much miscommunication that goes on, and that's when things spiral out of hand. And like my brother just said, joking or not, men always want to fix everything, and again, that comes from a place of, it doesn't always seem like it, but it does come from a place of being in service. That's the way we're bred. This is what's been going on for thousands of years. So what I tell the guys is really important is to be clear and succinct. Okay, is to use your words and articulate and be concise. I've said this before. Women may think that the joke is always women are so chatty, so chatty. If you saw the guys in the circle when they feel like they're in a safe and sacred space and they know their brothers are listening and supporting, they'll open up and they'll go on and on and on and on. And it is a beautiful thing, because a lot of these guys have not had the opportunity to have other brothers sit and listen and just like the women do, commiserate and understand and feel and emote and empathize, so it's really important. So it's being clear and succinct. It's and making sure that the message is clear to the person that you're communicating with, and that means asking questions. Is this clear to you? Do you understand what I'm saying? What did you hear me say? And getting that feedback, from the person, the woman or the man, whoever it is that you're communicating with, and listening to that feedback and making sure there's a effective rapport there. And again, that there's trust there and that you're on the same page, so to speak. And again, the caveat is you don't have to agree with each other, but there does need to be that give and receive, that you understand, and being concise and clear is a very important part of that.
The giving and the receiving. Yeah, that does bring up the masculine and the feminine as well, that we are here to have that interlacing back and forth.
I get too shy to tell the woman that I'm doing this or that for her. So yeah.
I hear that, and on one hand, that's very sweet that you're doing something and it creates that shyness. But as a woman, I would actually appreciate it even more and acknowledge it even more, I think, if I were told. And so, what about that shyness that that he was speaking of, Waska? What is that, or how would you guide a man to create more conscious, present communication around something like that, so that it didn't create conflict later?
Such a great point that my brother brings up here. Again, the intention may be lost. And I used to be guilty of this quite often. And probably still am at times. Women, in my experience, they want to be communicated to. They want to be told what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what your intentions are. And, not to make excuses, in the past, I have actually honestly believed that I verbalize something or express something, and then when it's pointed out to me, well, you actually didn't tell me that. And I'm like, wow, you're right, I thought that, and my intention was in a good space, but I didn't actually say it. I didn't communicate it effectively. So to answer this question, it's really important, and I tell guys, try it, see where it gets you, because if you haven't tried it before, you'll never know. Speak your intentions, speak to her, let her know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and ask her if she understands, and watch how the communication flourishes when you're both on the same page of understanding, and is active communication, active listening.
Active listening. This was a great conversation, Waska. I think it really opens up the space for us to dig deeper in the future into how we can really get the deeper issues and ideas across between men and women that need to be had. And I think we live in a world right now where there is such diversity and there is divide that still exists. So I really appreciate the conversations that you're bringing forward through this Way of Illuminated Warrior talk show. And any closing thoughts before we wind up?
Oh, yes. Well, my heart is very happy, and thank you, Simran, for co-hosting this important topic. And gratitude to my brothers who chimed in and added to the conversation, and anyone else who lent an ear. We encourage you to put your thoughts out there for us, so we could all communicate together. So, if anyone is interested, if they want to connect with me, the easiest way is just go to illuminatedwarrior.com. My intention, really, as a conscious man, and through the work I do, is to offer a safe and sacred space for men to feel heard and acknowledge, and to grow and to heal, and to connect with other brothers. So, that's what I'm all about. So again, thank you, Simran, and thank you for all who are listening.
Awesome. Again. Join us next week. We will be talking. The topic is Man Up, the stereotypes of man. So that should be an interesting one. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I am Simran, and thank you, Waska. Hear you next week.
I hope.
Visit IlluminatedWarrior.com if you'd like to go deeper and find out more about what's available within the Illuminated Warrior Men's Transformational Community. Tune in next time for more candid conversations for men and women about men on the Way of the Illuminated Warrior talk show every Thursday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. Until next time, illuminate your path with loving kindness.